And we're now on Facebook. So welcome, everybody. Good morning. Good to have you here at User's Guide for the Soul. We are joining our class. So if you're on Facebook Live, please join us. Actually, there's a link. Maya, if you're with us, can you copy the link and put it in the comments? There's a link if you want to follow with the text that I can put up on Facebook. We may get it there. We'll see. But we're in the Tanya, chapter 33, page 451, and we are learning. We're in the second to last chapter of a section on joy, and it's 26 to 34 with a little detour in 32. But 26 to 34 are chapters examining how we can make sure we are in a state of joy all the time, no matter what. And so the first 24 to 31 went through all the things that might be in the way of joy. So, and how to deal with each one really in detail. So if you want to learn that, please have a look at our previous classes, starting with the power of joy. That's where we started. 32 was a little detour that I love. Go check that out too. And now 33 and 34, rather than being reactive, rather than saying, well, if I'm not feeling happy, here's what I can do if I'm depressed about something in the world. Here's what I can do depressed about my own spiritual state. And etc. Now saying, if there's nothing wrong, if there's nothing negative in my life, now how can I increase joy and have access to that high functioning state as much time as possible? So we're not being reactive, we're being proactive, right? The first chapters before 32, we were problem solving, right? We were testing the system to make sure nothing was in the way. Now we're learning how to amp up joy in and of itself. And why do we want to be happy? If we remember our conversation when we started chapters, this whole section, we want to be happy not because of the pursuit of happiness, not because, as we say in America, pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, as if happiness itself is a goal. As Bainanim and as Reformed Jews, we want to be happy because everything we do as Reformed Jews, we do more effectively when we do it with joy. So if we want to serve the world, serve our families, serve our community, and serve God, being in a state of joy lets us be just much more effective. It's just a huge leverage point. So in the Tanya, joy is not a goal. We're not there to be happy because happy is nice, although we get the benefits. It's nice to be happy. We want to be happy because that way we are more effective in how we can be a Bainani and serve the world around us. So keep that in mind as we continue with these chapters. Chapter 33, we got a beautiful meditation. Said the best way to have the most intense joy is to meditate on a regular basis that the world, the entire world, is totally nullified in front of the infinite, in front of God. That everything we experience, it's not even there. It's not even there on a secondary way. It's completely vanished, nullified, non-existent. And that counts all the time. So wherever I am, whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm doing, that's God's essence right there, and the whole world is gone. And if I can meditate on that to the extent that that becomes my lens through which I see reality, and the world is no longer a barrier to me perceiving God in every situation, now I'm going to have tremendous joy because I'm always with God. I'm right there. God's with me all the time, no matter what my experience is. So I stop. The strategy here is it's not about being happy because of what I get. This is key because I already dealt with that, right? If I'm unhappy about anything in the physical world, go back to the earlier chapters. We talked about divine providence as a way to be joyful about that anyways. That's different. I've figured that out. I'm not going to be unhappy because of some knock that life sends me. I'm not going to be frustrated with what the world is how the world is treating me. As we'll see at the end, I can still be frustrated with how I'm treating the world. That's my focus. I'm focusing on how I'm giving, and that's where true joy comes, by following the divine soul and by helping people around me, helping God, helping Temple Israel, etc. So that's the way we get to this level of joy, is through that meditation that the world doesn't exist. I'm always with God, and that should make me happy. And then he goes into many, many examples to try and get us to really connect to it, from saying the world is so nullified, it's like a ray of the sun within the ball of the sun. That's no existence. right? Over a ray in the sun itself, it's not there. It's just sun. That's what the world is like. Or like one word that you and I might speak before we spoke it, the way it's included in ourselves and hidden in our emotions and intellect. That word doesn't really have an existence. It's just me. That's what the world is like as it's nullified before God. And then he gives us all these angles on how to amp up the joy, where he says, imagine how a peasant would feel if a king came and decided to live with them. That's what's happening with us, with God, every time we focus and meditate and recognize that the world really has no existence. It's only God. And that makes a home for God in my mind, in my environment. And how happy should I be that I'm now being a host? I'm making a home for God in my mind, in my life. That should bring me joy. Not only that, but as we say in Judaism, that's the purpose why the whole world was created. So God made the whole world so you and I would come here and say, looks like a physical world. Actually, it's God. Let me treat it that way and make a home for God there in my relationships, in my environment. And now I'm actually bringing the world to its conclusion. I'm serving the purpose of the world. That should make me happy, 2. And then 3, by the way, there's this one infinite being who's interested in what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. And when I turn around and I say, you know what? It's just God, even though it looks like a physical world, that consciousness brings God tremendous joy. And so I should be happy that God is happy. That's 3. So we have this double and redoubled joy that not only am I close to God, and I recognize that through this meditation, but also I'm fulfilling the world's purpose. So that's pretty climactic, right? And 3, I'm bringing God pleasure, which who doesn't want to bring an infinite being pleasure when you're a finite being? That's, if you think about it, that's like, whoa, I can bring pleasure to God. I can get into that. And if we allow this structure to flow in our mind and our heart, we can generate tremendous joy, really no matter what, because this is just applies for a whole life, every situation. So we're now picking up and we're kind of wrapping up this chapter, and he's going to give us and even another reason to feel happy, even though all of us are not in our ideal physical state, which by Judaism is in Israel, because Israel is the physical epicenter of the world, and the energy flows to Israel first, according to Kabbalah. And so there's even halakha, there's Jewish law, you're not allowed to leave Israel except for a few certain reasons. If you're in Israel, it's actually halakhically prohibited to leave. And so we're here in the diaspora, but the Alter Rebbe says, don't be unhappy. You should be even happier because you're now creating this home for God, not in Israel, but even in a more dense, coarse place, the diaspora, as we'll see. We're picking up 451. ובפרט בחוץ לארץ שהאוויר ארץ העמים טמא ומלא קליפות וסטרא אחרא, ואין שמחה לפניו יתברך, כאורה ושמחה ביתרון אור הבא מן החושך דייקה.
This is especially so in the diaspora, where the atmosphere is unclean and is filled with klipot and sitra achra. There's no greater joy for God than the light and joy caused by transforming darkness into light, when the light has the superior quality acquired by coming out of the very darkness.
Yeah, so here's a few reasons we should be happy, even though, according to Kabbalah, I'm in a more coarse area of the earth. I should be pining to be in Israel, and my divine soul would love to live in Israel. I should be happy that I'm doing it here, because when you're in a more dark place, light has more significance. Right? If I have a little flashlight and I'm outside on a bright summer day, at summer camp, and I'm like, here, I got a flashlight, nobody cares, right? But if we're in the woods, lost, and the sun has set, and now it's pitch black, and I finally found in the bottom of my backpack, I say, oh, I have a flashlight. That little bit of light has a lot of significance now, doesn't it? Now suddenly, everybody's relying on my little flashlight to get out of the situation, to see where they're going to step, to feel secure, right? So a tiny bit of light in the darkness is much more significant than in the daylight. Same thing with being in Israel or being in the diaspora. When we create this light, so to speak, here, it's much more significant. And we can even go a step further, because it's not just the quality that light has when it's in the darkness, that it's more, it's got more oomph to it. But also, if you look at the words carefully, it says, or haba min hachoshech. So that could mean light that comes when you're in the darkness. It could also mean light that comes literally from darkness. So if you could picture a box of darkness without introducing light into it, which is the normal way that light appears, you bring light and then the darkness is gone. We're talking about actually transforming darkness itself into light. And if I could do that, if you could imagine, without bringing a flashlight, the light of the forest, the darkness of the forest suddenly just itself becoming light, right? I guess that's something like infrared goggles or something. I don't know what that is. That light has an even more higher quality and even loftier quality, because it's different than the light that just appears in the darkness. It's actually the darkness itself transforming into light. And that's the quality of the light we create here in the diaspora. When I take a lump of cheese, did I do my blessing for this morning? I'm not sure. Let me do that, right? So let me make sure the cheese I ate this morning. No, I did do the blessing. So the cheese I ate this morning, it's just a lump of cheese. It's just physical reality. I want to transform that into holiness and spiritual light. And I'm doing that now by using that as my energy to learn Torah. So it's happening. I can be aware of it or not. But the fact that I'm doing it here in the diaspora means I've taken this lump of the physical world and I'm turning that thing that's blocking God's presence, right? And I know the whole world is a spiritual flow at some level, but to my physical eyes, that cheese looks like there's no God there. It's just physical cheese. And if you or I look at it, we don't physically see God. We have to have our mind's eye project that, right? That's what we're talking about. But when I take that cheese and I change it to holiness, now I have light that's actually been transformed from darkness. And that's the special advantage of this technique, is that when I'm aware that it's actually God that's there in my meal and in my conversation, I'm taking the physical aspects of the world, the aspects that hide God's presence, and I'm transforming them into light. And that light has such a special quality. And so we should be even happier that we have the advantage, the opportunity to do it in the diaspora.
Cantor?
Yes.
Isn't that what God did when he created light?
How so?
So we're doing what, well, it said, and out of the darkness, God created the light.
Oh yeah,
So
I don't know that
you
know, Yehi or necessarily means Yehi or min hachoshech. Like God can create things. So I think the way I understand it, the spiritual light at the beginning of the universe, that was something God created out of God's essence. God just created it. God didn't need the darkness to be there to create the light. It just, there was darkness, and then there was this light. So yeah, it may be someone's written about how that light is out of darkness, but I haven't seen it, if it is. And this is...
It's beautiful that, because if God brought the light out of the darkness, and we're doing the same thing in the diaspora, you know.
It is, yeah, it is. Yeah. And anytime we can imitate
quality in us that's doing that, maybe.
Anytime we can emulate God, that's a bonus. So maybe do some research for me, because I know you've got a lot of you do a lot of learning. So if you could find a source that says, I'd love to see it, because it's a beautiful angle.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't either. I'll look.
Before we move on, any questions about that? Because it's a really juicy piece. Yeah. This like bringing light literally from darkness rather than lighting up the darkness. Yeah, does that ring for people?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Good. And if there's any comments on Facebook, you know, I see we're streaming. Feel free to write a comment here if you're with us on Facebook. And you know, we'll try and address your questions if you're on Facebook Live. Going on. And so here's how God feels about when we transform light to darkness. Right? Am I Ve'ein Simcha? Is that where I am?
No.
No, I'm down. Okay, V'zehu shekatuv.
Zeu.
Okay, we did this. V'zehu shekatuv yismach Yisrael be'osav. This is Maxine.
This is the meaning of the verse, let Israel rejoice in its maker. Note the expression maker, not creator or the like.
Right, and so here we're going to really go deep in this word be'osav, in Israel's maker, but it's actually plural, right? In this quote, from Psalms, Osav is plural, which is weird because we have one God, right? So he's gonna take two angles on this Osav, but the point is, as we'll see, Perush shekol mishehu mizer Yisrael yesh lo lismoach b'simchat Hashem asher sas v'sameach b'dirato v'tachtonim shehem b'chinat Asea gashmit mamash.
Whoever is the seed of Israel ought to rejoice in the joy of God. Who is happy and joyous with his abode among the creatures of the lower sphere who are on the level of actual physical Asea.
Right. So now that we've learned some Kabbalah, we know that the lowest spiritual world is called Asea, and it's the world of action, the world that's influenced by action, that creates action, etc. When we read this, Yismach Yisrael B'Osav, we see, when we say rejoice in our Maker, we're talking about that aspect of God that relates to Asea, where we naturally live. We're naturally creatures of Asea. We're defined by actions, right? You know, who am I? If you ask me who I am in the world, well, I'm a cantor. That's something I do. I'm a dad. That's something I've done. We think of ourselves as a series of actions, and we're defined by these actions. And so we should rejoice specifically that here we are, we're in the lowest world, and we're rejoicing in our Maker, and we're connecting that Maker, Osav, to Asea. And the world Asea is related to the world Oseh, to do, and so is Osav. So that's really the same word connecting. That's the aspect of God that naturally connects to Asea, the spiritual world. Did I get that point? I think I expressed it circuitously. But we should rejoice that we are in Asea, that we're physical creatures that deal with action, and we should rejoice specifically directing ourselves to our Maker, Osav, that is making the world of Asea. See? V'zeu shekatuv be'osav l'shon rabim.
For this reason, the plural form, help me, is used. Yeah, is used.
And here he says, no coincidence. Usually God is singular, is unified. And suddenly we have makers, Osav. What's the deal with the plural? He says that's because we're in the world of Asea. And when we look out, we see many people in this class, many people in the world, many creatures in the world, many days in the world. And we experience it as a multiplicity. And each of those things is created by a kind of a Cleepa, a kind of a spiritual force that creates the physicality of the world. And that has a multiplicity. And the fact that we see the world as not one, but as a multiplicity, and then we have the opportunity to unify that with our faith, that we should rejoice in, right? So that's why he uses Osav plural, that we should celebrate that. For us, it's a challenge to see that unity. We're not like angels who just know that they're nullified before God. We have to work at it, meditate it, and create it. And we should celebrate and rejoice in Osav, in our Maker, that we have this sense that there's some multiplicity in the world. We don't have to go deep on that, but I love it. I think it's a fun way to wrap up this chapter, and it really gets me excited with all these kabbalistic terms that are coming up. Shehu olam hazeh hagashmi hamaleh klipot v'sitra achra shenikra reshut harabim v'ture difruda.
This plural expression, makers, refers to our physical world that is filled with klipot and sitra achra, which are called a public domain, that is, a domain of multiplicity, and mountains of separation, in that they are arrogant and separate from one another.
Right. And Eleanor, we had an exchange that related to this, right? And we're talking about Cleepa, and is it true that when I meditate, I'm bringing light to the entire world? Yes, including the physical, the spiritual, everything, right? So there, we had an exchange, and I want to address it because probably other people, are looking at this and thinking the same thing. I thought God creates the whole world. The whole world is God. So how can there be something that's not holiness in the world that's Cleepa, right? But we're talking about not God's perception of the world. So from God's perception, everything is God, everything is holiness. There's nothing in the world. The worst event, you name it, God is creating it, and it's actually nullified before God. It's all within God. It's all God, right? So you go to the extreme, everything is God, everything is holiness, and no one can argue with that. But that's God's perspective. because God doesn't see any of the barriers. God doesn't see tzimtzum. God doesn't see the restraint and contraction that happens. It's a one-way mirror. It's only for us that it happens. It's not for God. So I won't argue with you if we're talking about God's perspective, but this class is about our perspective and elevating our perspective. And in my perspective, when I look out and I see these headphones, I don't see God there, right? My physical eyes see plastic and whatever and wires, and it's just neutral, right? It doesn't look like it is subsumed and nullified before God. It looks like it's a separate thing. I can name it, I can hold it, it has a boundary around it, I can own it, I can use it for good or for bad, whatever. So that's called Cleepa, and it's from our perspective that there's aspects of the world that look like they are not nullified before the complete unity. And when I take them and I use them to mix services for Temple Israel, I use them for a good purpose. Now, if I've done it well, this Cleepa, its energy, the actual quantum energy that's creating the matter, is now connected to holiness and now becomes part of that oneness. And if I do it with consciousness, now I can be happy that I've taken a piece of the world, I've elevated it back to its source, and I've created more holiness rather than separation. But in Kabbalah, that's the definition of holiness and its opposite. Holiness is anything that is you can't say self-aware that's nullified, because when you're self-aware, when you're nullified, there's no self-awareness. But anything that's lost its identity and recognizes that it's part of total oneness, that's holiness. So that's bringing what we call spiritual light into the world, like a Torah scroll. You look at it and you have a sense of reverence, because that's just our tradition. That's God's words. We know in our DNA that's there just to be transparent to God, to bring our tradition to us. I look at a loaf of bread, and not necessarily the same. I don't know that it's nullified before God. I could just be really hungry for bread and just eat it for pleasure, and it can grow my ego. So that's called Cleepa, and we're the ones that determine how Cleepa becomes elevated to holiness, to Kedusha, right? Now, God looks at the whole thing, and I get it. From God's perspective, there's no such thing as evil. There's no such thing as Cleepa. There's no physical world. It's all gone. But we're here to work from our perspective and elevate this creation, even though from God's perspective, it's all nullified. It's a paradox, but does that get at it? I'm curious. Eleanor, maybe we have a bit of this conversation here. Yeah.
But there's so much talk in what we've done about the Jewish people and how we're connected, and the people that are not Jewish, and that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Not the things like a headphone or a loaf of bread, but people. Got it.
And that's, I'll agree that in the whole scope of the text, there's language in here that in a Reformed community certainly is difficult, because we really are into equality and rights and elevating all peoples and working with connections between people. So I take your point that something written kind of in the shtetl in Europe where it was a given that non-Jews created pogroms and non-Jews were sort of an outsider to our community. It was a little more natural to kind of have that language. But certainly in Kabbalah, every person who lives has infinite importance, right? So I want to stress that you don't have to be Jewish to have a soul. Every person has a soul. Every person who lives has infinite importance according to Kabbalah and Chassidus. And every person who lives has a direct connection to God, right? And if they follow their pathway, because in Kabbalah there's 70 nations that each have their own pathway to get to God. By their pathway, they can get directly to God. They don't have to be Jewish or anything like that, right? We have our pathway, they have theirs. So that's the aspect I like to focus on. And everybody that lives has a purpose. Everybody that lives helps elevate the world and has a role in it. And everybody that lives is infinitely important. So those are the pieces that I focus on. But yeah, there's some what's the word we use? Ethnocentricity in this tradition, like in almost every spiritual tradition. So I get that's a little hard for us to go deep on, and I try not to focus on it when we get to it either.
So my statement I had done before when we were exchanging emails is that when we bring down the light, we're bringing it down for everybody. That maybe we will light the world and change it.
Yes.
Just by bringing the light down.
Yes, and that I'd say the Alter Rebbe agrees with fully. I think I agree that's expressed in his text. And if I taught it in a way that maybe contradicted that would have been my failing. But certainly when I make my world better, if I recognize in my breakfast that was God and I'm elevating it, that's like a pond that's a ripple in the pond that affects the entire pond.
Right.
And absolutely the same thing. When we do this, we're doing our part to elevate the entire world, including, of course, every person and also every animal and every plant and every physical piece of the world, that we see this as light that affects everything for sure. Yeah, that I agree with.
Right. That's where I was coming from. And what happens to me, I don't know if it was you or not, I get stuck on words.
Yeah.
And I don't get past them. So
good. Well, does this kind of bridge that a little bit?
Yes.
Good. Thanks. And it's important to me because I know when someone has a question, there's usually another 5 or 10 people that I didn't hear from. So I'd love to kind of get into it. Are we good? All right,
yeah.
come on.
The internet went out for me.
Oh, welcome back, Ruth. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The plural is Cleepa Ve'itapchan linhora v'nasim reshut hayachid yichudo yitbarech be'emunah zo.
God's joy in the fusion of this plurality is aroused when, through this faith in God's unity, they, the Cleepa, are transformed into light and they become a private domain. It is a unified realm for God's unity.
Yes, a lot of nice terms here, public domain and a private domain, but essentially, this makes God very happy. When we do this, when we look out and we recognize that it's all God, and even though I see a physical world with physical eyes, that doesn't interrupt God's presence in my consciousness, that now brings tremendous joy to God. And that is really, as we said, this chapter is a key chapter in all of Hasidic thought, really, about why, we have these paintings of Hasidim dancing around and being happy, and are they just drunk? What's going on there? Is it just cultural? No, it's about this chapter or other approaches like it that say, no matter what's happening, condition myself to always recognize God and not let the physical world be a barrier to God's presence. And the more I can do that, the more I'll be in the state of joy, and the more that'll let me be effective in the world, as you said, Eleanor, to really improve the entire world and every being in it, and do my part to elevate us to kind of this final tipping point where really everyone is in that state all the time. So we'll now shift to chapter 34. So this is the last chapter, as I said, in our section on joy. I hope you guys are feeling happier than when you were learning that previous section, which was all about like, oi, that's so low. It's more fun, isn't it? So any other questions on 33 before we move on? Because this is really, I'd love if people would practice this a little, whether you're here or on Facebook, and use this meditation, because it improves life and it lets us help the world in such a big way. So any other questions on this chapter? Yes, Maxine.
I still have a little trouble reconciling the fact that we are not really here. I mean, we're in this world, we're doing things, life affects us individually. Some are sick, some are well, whatever. But you're saying that this really isn't happening. I don't know. It's hard for me to grab that concept.
Yeah, I get that. The question is, well, hold on. If you're saying I'm supposed to be more happy meditating that the world is nullified before God, well, doesn't that mean that, what does it matter if it's not here? Like, why should I help a person? If I did a good thing, is it really non-existent? If someone's sick, who cares, right? They don't exist. Why should I help them? And we, to repeat, we definitely don't go there, right? When we say the world is nullified before God, we don't mean now the world because it's not there. We mean the world matters so much more because it's all God, right? So rather than saying, oh, that the world is nullified, that's tough for me because hold on, if someone's sick, I want to help them. Well, now we know that the world is nullified before God. That means my experience of someone being sick, God intended for me to be there. There's something I have to give, and there's some way I can help them. And this whole experience, God's watching it. God's right here with me. And that person who's sick, they're also a spark of God, just like I am. So this is really, it's all now infinitely important. There's constant infinite awareness, and there's infinite meaning to every time I help someone else. So in Judaism, we don't come to the conclusion that it matters less that the world is nullified. We come to the conclusion that now everything matters more, and we have to be at our best at all times. There's no moment that's just whatever, I don't care, because God created this moment. There's something I'm missing if I don't realize the meaning in a moment. So it's really meant to put us in the opposite state, Maxine, than what you're describing. I don't know if that helps the question for you.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on that? That's a tricky one. Yes, Eleanor?
See, that's what happens to me when I see the word nullify and I apply it to what I know about the word nullify, and it's not really what was meant.
Okay. So maybe that word nullify is a bad word to use, because nullify, yeah, it's like, I think of math, it's like just null it out, right? It's not there. And bitul in Hebrew has a lot different connotations, right? Bitul also means to be humble in front of someone, to like, if I have bitul in front of a person, like if I'm around my grandfather, alav shalom, I don't have him with me, but say I was around my grandfather, he's a wise person with all his tradition, I love him and I respect him, and I'm just, I talk less, I listen more, I follow his cues, I lower myself so that I'm less there, so that I can be more receptive to him. That's bitul, right? So when we say the world is bitul before God, it's not like a mathematical, like wiping it out like it doesn't matter. It means like, ooh, yeah, there's a world, but the whole world is God. And the fact that the world is knocking me around, okay, but God made that. So there's a reason I'm getting stronger, right? The fact that there's a problem, okay, I can get bitter about that, but no, it's not about the world, is about God made this world, and now I'm going to help improve it and make it a better place. So yeah, maybe there's a better English word than nullified, because bitul has such different connotations. It's an emotional, relational word, Bitul, that's it. Bitul implies a relationship with the thing that you're being, the thing that you are being transparent to. Whereas nullified means there's just nothing there. It's mathematical. Maybe that's the issue. So say the world is nullified, you're not in a relationship with God. It's just, oh, there's no world, and now it's just you're just sort of you're in nihilism, right? But bitul means the world is transparent because you have a relationship with God, and it's about a relationship. You're always bitul to something else, whereas nullified is not to something else automatically. So that's for me a key difference in the word, if you get it. Yeah. Ooh, that's a good conversation. I think you just changed the whole way I'm going to teach Tanya forever, right? That word nullified has a bit of a pit hole, doesn't it? A pitfall. Yeah. Interesting. Any other questions?
Yeah, bitul means you're trying to show respect to something more than yourself.
Yeah.
Not that you're nullifying yourself. You're
showing
showing respect.
Okay. So very good. Like in modern Hebrew, bitul is a indication of respect. Like if you're in a state of bitul, it's like, well, you're around somebody greater than you, so just follow their lead, kind of thing, right? So yeah. So never when we say the world is bitul before God, it doesn't make the world less meaningful. It means like the world is just, every aspect of the world is infused with respect for its creator, and then it means so much more. Yeah, but yeah, when it has a relationship with the creator, that it's so bitul that it's just like a thought hidden in God's intellect before God even says it. So the world we don't want to get hypnotized and focused on the physicality of the world. We want to look through that and see the relationship with God that the world is always bringing out to us. And that's what the bitul means. It's seeing God in the world, in every person, in every conversation. It's not saying, well, the world's not there, so now it doesn't matter. God forbid. God forbid. Okay, let's move forward to chapter 34. So two aspects of chapter 34. So one aspect is, in chapter 33, we're talking about meditating to get ourselves to a state where we were always happy that we were there with God. That, as I said, the world has bittul in front of God. The world is. Can someone come up with a better English word then for bittul? What do you want to use for the rest of the class today? Not nullified, but yeah.
I was thinking about, you had used the word transparent in your discussion, and I was thinking maybe another way of saying it is seeing the world through God's eyes.
Yes. What
God sees.
Yes. Yeah. So sort of God-centric.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. So let's popcorn out words. If there's a better word we can find, I'm happy to use it. It'd be great to kind of dig around there in English.
Like unity, would that be a good word?
Yeah, unified. Yeah, but
I think humbled works really well.
Humbled. I like that.
Humbled. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just keep going. There's got to be something. Yeah. So the fact that the world is humble before God, to the extent that it's not there, should bring us great joy that we're always with God, and we meditate on that. And that's our intellectual work, to bring ourselves to that state, higher and higher. So I'm always seeing God. But here in chapter 34, we get sort of a vehicle through which we can now reach that state just like that, almost automatically. Well, really automatically, but whether we're aware of it or not, that's the trick, right? But we can get ourselves to that state where we are also seeing the humility of the world and the non-existence of the world automatically at the level that we were when we were at Sinai, more or less, right? So that's the one thing, and that is the mitzvahs. So we're going to look at what it really means to do a physical mitzvah, a physical commandment or connector, right? And we're also going to look at that as much as we talk about chapter 33, and this is a technique we should work on and elevate ourselves, the Alter Rebbe will admit this is not easy to do, and it's something that certain people in history can do much better than others. So depending on the level of our soul and the level and the quality of our intellect and how we connect to the levels of Torah, not everybody is going to do this as easily as everyone else, and that it's a tough thing to just 24/7 wake up, look at the world, and see God, right? So we get kind of a, when you're flying, and I'm like, the lowest Delta medallion level, but, I can pay an extra $80 for the day, and I can get up to another level. So imagine, you get a free pass to be like diamond level or whatever it is, and you get all the perks, and you get the champagne. I don't know what diamond level people get. You get to move around on the plane. You can, or whatever it is. Imagine, you get a free pass to be diamond level, for one trip, and you can enjoy all the perks. That's what this chapter is like. It's showing us how when you do a mitzvah, so when you learn Torah here and you talk about it, when you give charity, when you come and pray at Temple Israel, when you help a person, when you love another Jew, that can bring you to this state of chapter 33, but it's like a free pass. Not necessarily because you're at that level and you've worked on yourself, so that's really your natural perspective, but because now the mitzvah has a power to elevate us, as we'll see. Let's dive in. V'hineh mudad zot shehavot hen hamerkava. I'm not sure where we're at in the reading. Doreen, is it you?
Okay. It is known that the patriarchs are truly the divine chariot.
Okay, so in chapter 23, if you remember, we talked about how while we're doing a mitzvah, we can get to this level called chariot. And the ultimate chariot was Abraham, Sarah. They were just chariots for God's. Sorry. I just saw someone in the waiting room there. Sorry. If you want to come back, I'll let you in there. I just missed that. They were so at the level of chapter 33. They were so constantly aware that everything within and without was just God. Hi there. Welcome. If you can let us know who you are, we'd love to know who you are. iPhone LJMM is who?
Oh, Joyce.
Oh, how you doing? How you doing?
Well,
Welcome.
sorry, I'm late.
Pardon me?
Just keep going. Thank you. Sorry,
Good.
I'm late.
Welcome to have you. Good to have you. Good to have you. We're on page 454. So this level of chariot, and that is, if I'm riding a horse, right? Well, the horse likes to eat hay, jump over things, go where it wants, drink water, eat an apple. The horse has its own will. But I'm telling the horse, follow this road for the next 4 hours, right? I'm riding the horse. So if the horse is well trained, the horse is going to follow the road for the next 4 hours and turn right and turn left. It's going to follow my will. But does the horse still have its own will? Right? Yes. It's still a horse. It still likes what horses like. I've just trained it. When I go this, it turns right, right? Now, does a chariot have its own will? Easy question, right? No. A chariot is an inanimate object. It's not like a horse that wants to do this or that, but I have to train it. If I say boom, the chariot just goes boom. The chariot just follows my will completely. It has no will of its own. That's the level that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, they were at that level all the time. And not just quantitatively, but qualitatively. So there was no point in their adult lives where they even wavered for a moment from recognizing the world is completely just God, right? They recognized the world was never a boundary for them to perceive God's oneness. And then they always did what they perceived as God wanting, to the extent that there wasn't any Abraham there. Abraham didn't have Abraham's own wants. Abraham just wanted what God wanted in every situation. That's called the level of a chariot. Very, very extreme, right? No one's expected to become a chariot. However, we'll see that we get a free pass to get that level of Merkava, of chariot, when we do a mitzvah. And so we get like a little moment of it. Shekol yimehem l'olam lo hifsiku afilu sha'achat milkasher datam v'nishmatam l'ribon holamim. Eleanor, I think it's Europe. Oh, can you unmute yourself? Thanks.
Throughout their lives, they did not cease even momentarily from binding their minds and soul to the master of the universe.
It's intense. Throughout my whole life, what I do maybe 10 minutes in the morning, meditating that the world is humbled out of existence before God, and trying to bring that as an anchor into my world. So I'm a little less of a self-centered kind of oaf and a little more of a mensch, right? And that's me trying to be, make a home for God in the world. They just were at 100% all the time, no matter what. Not even for one moment did they waver. Can you imagine? So talk about affecting the whole world. That's a person that just them saying hello to a traveler is bringing light to the entire world, because they're on such a high level and they're always on that level. And they open whole portals to kabbalistic sfirot that we can now benefit from. And they affected even generations and generations later. I still now have access to Chesed and Gevurah because of Abraham and Isaac and the way they lived, right? So to that point, of course, it affects the whole world, especially at that level. Bitul, and there's that word bitul, surrender. How's that? Do you like that?
Better than nullify, yeah.
Yeah, surrender is now. Thank you, translator, right? Bitul haniskar la'el lichudo yitbarech. We're at, Paula, are you able to read for us? You want to unmute and read? We're at, with the aforementioned.
I'm not sure where.
With page 454,
Yep, that's
third
it.
piece, with the aforementioned.
Okay. with the aforementioned absolute surrender to his unity.
And let's go on. Their constant awareness. Let's read that note.
Their constant awareness of God's unity led them to be continuously in a state of self-nullification before God. And as explained more fully in chapter 23, this self-nullification is what is meant by the term chariot, a vehicle submissive to the will of its pilot.
Yeah, so there's a sense of surrender, a sense of submission in a positive way, right? So that was their level all the time, completely, such that there was just no ego there at all, right? It's Tisha B'Av, which we'll talk about. So there's a fast. Well, there wasn't Tisha B'Av in Abraham's time, but for us, if we got the Tisha B'Av and I saw a hamburger, I wouldn't think, oh, I'd like to have that hamburger, but I'm not gonna because it's a fast day. It's just God doesn't want me to eat. It doesn't look appealing to me because I'm only here with God's good in mind, right? Whereas for me, I have to put my will aside and not eat the hamburger for a day because it's a fast day.
How are these different than the tzaddikim?
So someone, a tzaddik isn't necessarily a merkava, right? Because a tzaddik only has a divine soul. But even like there's still a way that you can be an incomplete tzaddik or a complete tzaddik. You can have a little bit you've nullified out, and I mean a tzaddik is a rare, very special person that's only thinking about what God wants, but they're not necessarily got themselves to a level of merkava where they just have no ego whatsoever, even so to speak, within their divine soul, right? So merkava is you're talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, like that's this is like a peak moment. And we were all, by the way, as we'll learn, at that place at Sinai. Every one of us was a merkava. Well, we couldn't handle it. That's why we couldn't handle the level of merkava. That's why our souls flew out, as we'll learn, right? So we experienced what it's like to be so surrendered to God that there was only God and the whole world was just gone. But because we hadn't brought ourselves naturally to that level, our bodies couldn't take it and the souls flew out. Right, but we got like a blink of it, and we're like, that's enough. Twice is all we can take. So yeah, not every tzaddik is the level of merkava.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. A chariot on a flat surface has no intent in going any place without it being driven or directed. But if it's on a hill, there's some momentum that adds to the complexity of the direction. So it's another force. What would that force be called?
Oh, yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's expand the metaphor, and maybe this will be helpful, maybe not. I don't know. We're just going into it. So questions asked, and maybe we'll wrap up there and then talk a little about Tisha B'Av. So the idea of a chariot is it has no will of its own, right? And in a sense, when I'm the driver, if I drive a chariot over a plateau onto a hill, now I know that momentum is going to keep the chariot going, but it's my will. The chariot didn't decide to get itself on the hill. So the chariot is now speeding, but I'm the one that decided to do that. It's still the will of the driver to put the chariot on that hill. Do you know what I mean? But, can we gain something from that? Like if you're at the level of a chariot, that means you want to put yourself in situations where momentum helps, or if I'm going uphill,
Well, what I was thinking of is that you're not always in control. There's some things that are out of control, out of your realm. And whether that's nature or God, it just tells you that you have to be more humble, that you can't will something totally on your own, that there are other things that can play into it.
Yeah, I like that. I think that makes the same point, Karen, that, if I'm a horse and I'm on a hill, I have my own will. Maybe I'm not going to keep going down that hill. If I'm a chariot and I'm on a hill, well, now I'm just going to keep going. There's nothing in me that says, well, stop, right? This hill keeps going and I follow it until the hill hits the bottom. And a chariot is just going to go with God's plan, so to speak, all the way. It's never going to put the brakes on of its own. I see Elizabeth here said emunah, faith. I don't know if that's referring to our conversation, but yeah. So exactly. So if you're at the level of chariot, that hill, you could see it as faith, as emunah, as Elizabeth said on Facebook. And if you're chariot, you're just going with that faith and the momentum keeps you going. Whereas If you're someone like me, you kind of wonder, whoa, what's at the bottom of this hill? Do I really want to keep going in this direction? And you sometimes don't let divine providence, kind of lead you. Very nice. I like that.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Okay, in the last 5 minutes, we'll pause here. I think it's a good introduction to chapter 34. It's also a beautiful chapter that finishes our discussion of joy. Let's take a moment to talk about next week. We're not having a class because it is Tisha B'Av. And I thought about it actually a lot, about whether to have a class or not. And we're not just not having a class because, I'll be fasting and maybe tired or whatever. Actually, part of the traditional observance of Tisha B'Av, believe it or not, says we can't have a Tanya class on Tisha B'Av. We actually can't do that at the hour that we do. So let's talk about Tisha B'Av and the different things that we could bring in as Reform Jews. Just for anyone not sure, Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av. It's the other full 26-hour or so fast day, aside from Yom Kippur, that's on the Jewish calendar. If you're wondering, as my wife often does, whether this is a made-up, kabbalistic kind of day, no, this is like for all Jews. We all observe Tisha B'Av, every denomination. And of course, part of it is, just like in Yom Kippur, not eating or drinking for, from sundown until the 3 stars appear, so about 26 hours. So, I recommend, if you're healthy enough, to do that just like in Yom Kippur. And that is because Tisha B'Av was the day when traditionally both temples were destroyed. So this whole idea of there being a dwelling place for God that we're working on, that was physically epitomized by the temple, and traditionally and kabbalistically was said to actually happen in the temple. The Holy of Holies was the place where this complete surrender to the unity of God happened in the physical world. Totally. Let's go with that, right? It happened there totally. So God said, let there be a little place where this total unity is going to express, and that's in the Holy of Holies. And that happened, and we did all our stuff there. So that was destroyed, and every branch of Judaism has a day of mourning to mark that. That's Tisha B'Av. So one piece you could do is not eat for at least the first half of the day or the whole day if you can. But also the other practices of Yom Kippur apply. So I think some of us know them, like who can popcorn out. What do we do or not do on Yom Kippur? Who knows? Anybody remember? Oh, Rick is reaching for the button. Okay.
You don't shower, you don't shave, you don't drink, nothing happy, no lotions, no leather.
Leather shoes. You can wear leather watch brand, but not leather shoes. Yeah.
No shopping.
No hanky panky. That's right. So
no shopping, no spending money.
Is that true? On Tisha B'Av, you can't spend money?
Well, on Yom Kippur, you're not supposed to. On any Yom Tov, you're not supposed to go shopping, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the malacha aspects of Yom Kippur do not apply. So it's not actually like a holy day where you can't drive a car. You can drive a car on Tisha B'Av, and I think you can buy an ice cube tray.
Nothing that makes you happy.
Yeah, but it's not. You wouldn't go out and buy like a bouncy toy for your kids. It's kind of against the spirit. But so traditionally, we named most of them, I think. So there's not eating and drinking. There is not listening to music for joy and things like that. You're not supposed to have weddings, certainly on Tisha B'Av. We don't bathe at all. So even like washing your hands, if you do that morning ritual of washing your hands, you just do up to the knuckles, and you're very careful not to wash your hands. Although if you're preparing food, you can wash the food and your hands can get wet doing that. Or if you go to the washroom, you can wash your hands as needed with that. But just the normal washing of hands that one would do. And during COVID, I don't know what the rabbis have said about, I saw Cindy was kind of giving me a face there. So during COVID, consult with your rabbi about to what extent we want to keep washing our hands for health. I'm not going to weigh in on that.
So there wouldn't be funerals?
No, I think you can have a funeral on Tisha B'Av. You can. Yeah. Why would there not be funerals? That's certainly not a celebratory thing. God forbid, right? But I think you can. I'm not certain. And then also not wearing leather shoes. So that's an easy one on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av. Just wear your wear your slippers instead of leather shoes. And then also no sexual intimacy goes so far as traditional Jews actually will not greet each other. So it's not just sexual intimacy, it's like a hug and a handshake. I mean, we're kind of in social distancing, so that's not so hard. That's the easy part of COVID. But actually just like saying, hey, how you doing? Good morning, like you would normally on Zoom. On Tisha B'Av, that there's a practice of not doing even that, I think until midday. And there's actually one piece that you don't do on Yom Kippur because we are considered in a state of mourning, and that is we don't sit on a regular height chair until halachic midday also. So you'll see on if you go to a traditional place where they're reading the scroll of Lamentations, everybody sits on like a cushion or a crate or something or on the floor because you're not actually halakhically allowed to sit on a full chair. You're like considered a mourner. So the whole thing, there's all these practices to put us in a state of mind of really mourning this destruction, and really for us, mourning what was the spiritual umbilical cord between us and the Ein Sof, where we go 3 times a year in the festivals and we kind of reignite ourselves with that sense of divine unity, and we take that into our lives, and where we actually see physical manifestations of this unity as we'll learn in the next chapter. So I won't see you next Thursday. Oh, and I didn't get to it. The last thing that you can't do is you actually can't learn Torah. Can you believe that?
Really?
Yeah, you're not allowed to learn Torah because, as we all know, it's a big geschmack. It's a big pleasure to learn Torah. I think we all come back and we get a sense of meaning of having learned and grown and connected to God, and that for Jews throughout history, that was considered one of the highest pleasures. You don't want to do the thing that brings you pleasure. So actually, on Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to learn Torah, and that's the reason why I canceled our class. I couldn't figure out a good way to kind of shift it. But you can learn the laws of Tisha B'Av, and you can learn the parts of the Torah that deal with the destruction of the temple. So there's certain tractates that way we learn describing that and describing, whether it's the laws of Tisha B'Av or the aspects of, what happened to the temple. So I hope
but you can have a funeral on Yom Kippur?
I don't know you'd have a funeral on Yom Kippur, but on Tisha B'Av, I believe you can.
On Tisha B'Av you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I hope each one of us maybe takes one piece of that and adds that to our day. That's Wednesday night at sundown to Thursday night, 3 stars. And we'll pick up when we come back. It's a pleasure having you all. Oh, Elizabeth Heather says no signing contracts. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Is that true?
Yeah.
I'm
Thanks,
assuming that we shouldn't watch television, which may be something in the right direction for a day.
It's a good thing, so not listening to music for pleasure, not watching your favorite sitcom, that's all part of the...
No, I'm talking about the news.
Oh, yeah, well, there you go. Okay, I'm going to sign off Facebook Live.